The mystery. On quiet Maple Street in the heart of Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, where Victorian houses lined the streets like silent sentinels guarding their residents' secrets, neighbors began to notice a peculiar behavior that defied any logical or rational explanation their curious minds could devise. Every 15th day, promptly at 2 in the afternoon, and when I say promptly, I mean with the mathematical precision of an atomic clock, Mr. Edward Martinez would walk purposefully to the North Avenue shopping center carrying a brown paper bag, one of those old-fashioned sturdy ones some traditional stores still use to wrap special purchases, as if each item were a precious treasure destined for someone very special. It wasn't just any walk, the kind we take absent-mindedly while our minds wander through random thoughts. It was almost a religious ritual, performed with the mechanical precision of a Swiss watch and the reverent solemnity of someone fulfilling a sacred, urgent mission that completely transcended the comprehension of casual observers. The more curious residents of Maple Street, the kind of people who never missed a single opportunity to meticulously observe the lives of others through windows carefully decorated with well-tailored linen curtains, noticed with growing fascination that he always returned completely empty-handed, walking with a slightly lighter step, a discreet but unmistakably satisfied smile on his time-wrinkled face. And his eyes, oh, his eyes, a little brighter, more alive, as if he'd just experienced something profoundly transformative and meaningful that none of us could decipher or comprehend. The man who bought gifts every month had gradually become the greatest mystery on that seemingly quiet and predictable street, where everyone knew not only everyone else's lives, from work schedules to food preferences, but also their most intimate secrets, the family dramas whispered behind closed doors, and even the secret casserole and apple pie recipes that each neighbor jealously guarded as a family heirloom. Mrs. Conceição Silva, born in Brazil but living in Chicago for over 30 years, was arguably the closest neighbor geographically and also the most observant in the entire area. That special kind of person who can detect changes in other people is routines, with the surgical precision of a state-of-the-art military radar capable of identifying any change, no matter how small, in the daily behavior of those around her. She had begun methodically recording the exact times and every observable detail of those mysterious monthly outings in a floral notebook she kept religiously in the kitchen drawer, next to her electricity bills and supermarket coupons. This man is definitely hiding something very strange, very suspicious, she would persistently murmur to her friends during social afternoons at Donna Noza's elegant hair salon on Fullerton Avenue, where rumors were born, grew, and spread throughout the entire neighborhood with the breathtaking speed of light, gaining fanciful details and increasingly elaborate interpretations with each new conversation. The most curious aspect, and this truly left the entire neighborhood genuinely intrigued and perplexed, is that Edward had lived completely alone for more than 10 long years, ever since his beloved wife Rosa had passed away suddenly and unexpectedly, leaving that red brick house that had once practically breathed life, laughter, and the constant aroma of home-cooked food, and which now seemed more like a silent museum dedicated to memories only he could access. He had no known children, at least not that anyone had ever seen or heard of. He received no regular visits from distant relatives from other cities or states. He maintained no visible correspondence with any of his extended family, and rarely, very rarely indeed, was seen conversing for more than 2 or 3 polite minutes with anyone in the neighborhood, always maintaining a respectful but decidedly reserved cordiality. He was a simple, honest man, retired from the Chicago Transit Authority after nearly 40 years of faithful and dedicated service, who cultivated with almost maternal care a small but impeccable front garden of vibrant red roses, planted, he himself had once mentioned in loving tribute to his wife's eternal memory, and raised with infinite patience 2 stray cats that had magically appeared in his yard one particularly cold and snowy winter morning, as if they instinctively knew that there they would find not only shelter and food, but also the unconditional love of someone who understood the deep meaning of loneliness. So who the hell did he buy those gifts for every single month, consistently spending his retirement money, which everyone knew wasn't exactly abundant on things that apparently no one on earth ever got? The question echoed insistently and obsessively through the narrow aisles of Mr. Giuseppe's small grocery store, in the lively circles of conversation that spontaneously formed in Lincoln Park on sunny Sunday afternoons, when families went out to walk their dogs and children, and even during Sunday Mass at St. Vincent de Paul Church, where women gathered ostensibly to pray, but in practice dedicated considerable time to discreetly commenting on each other's lives between prayers. The intriguing mystery of the man who bought gifts with seemingly no one to give them to had gradually become the collective obsession, not just of one street, but of an entire neighborhood, fueling increasingly elaborate and fanciful conspiracy theories ranging from possible mental problems related to old age to speculation about involvement in potentially suspicious or even illegal activities. But like every truly fascinating story that awakens our deepest, most primal curiosity, making us question our own seemingly solid certainties about the complex and often surprising nature of the human condition, this one began long before those monthly walks, carefully observed by nosy neighbors. In fact, it had its roots in a particularly rainy and melancholy April afternoon of the previous year, when Edward made a decision that would not only radically change his own life, but also touch, in unexpected and profoundly significant ways, the lives of people he never even imagined could be affected by his seemingly simple and silent actions. Everyday life. Edward Martinez religiously woke up every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, not out of immediate need for urgent commitments or external pressures of any kind, but rather out of a deeply ingrained and virtually unbreakable habit, developed over a lifetime of meticulously dedicated to the inflexible schedules and rigid, relentless discipline of Chicago's public transportation system, where a single minute of delay could mean serious cascading consequences for literally hundreds, if not thousands, of passengers dependent on efficient, punctual service. His morning routine was methodically organized and executed like a complex musical score, where every movement, every gesture, every activity had its precise timing and its specific place in the daily symphony of his carefully structured existence. The morning invariably began with strong aromatic black coffee brewed in an antique Italian pot that had belonged to his father, always served in the same sky-blue mug with tiny hand-painted white flowers that had been a special wedding gift from dear Rosa so many years ago, it sometimes felt like a lifetime ago. Along with the coffee came 2 generous slices of lightly toasted whole wheat toast, with a thin layer of unsalted butter applied with geometric precision, occasionally accompanied by a little organic honey I bought at the Saturday farmers market. Next came the sacred and unavoidable half-hour devoted entirely to meticulous reading of the Chicago Tribune on the small but cozy back porch, a space he had transformed over the years into a veritable personal sanctuary, where he could discreetly observe the subtle and predictable movement of his neighbors as they began their daily routines, each immersed in their own private world of worries, hopes, and responsibilities. After the morning ritual of information and observation, there invariably came the dedicated care of the garden, watering the red roses with almost maternal attention, observing each blossoming bud, each leaf changing color, carefully pruning the dead branches to make room for vibrant new growth, and chatting affectionately with Tobias and Francisca, the two cats with completely different personalities, who had chosen her house as their forever home on a snowy winter morning, as if they instinctively knew that there they would find not only food and shelter, but also the silent understanding of someone who knew intimately the profound meaning of chosen solitude versus the solitude imposed by life as circumstances. Finally, the solitary but never lonely lunch, always watching the local WGN news on the old 32-inch television that still worked perfectly after 15 years of faithful and consistent use, an electronic relic that stubbornly refused to break or malfunction, as if it understood its essential role in its owner's comforting routine. It was a life that many superficial outside observers, especially those accustomed to the frenetic pace and constant stimulation of modern urban life, would unhesitatingly call monotonous, repetitive, predictable, even melancholic or depressing. But for Edward, it represented something entirely different and infinitely more valuable. Genuine, hard-won peace after decades of hard work and heavy responsibilities, after the devastating emotional turmoil of losing the most important person in his life, after learning in the most painful way possible that true and lasting happiness rarely comes from the grand achievements or spectacular moments that everyone chases, but rather from the ability to find deep meaning and real satisfaction in the small, everyday things, in the seemingly insignificant details that make up the rich and complex texture of a life well lived. The man who bought gifts every month had found in the carefully calculated and consciously chosen simplicity a respectful and deeply loving way to honor the permanent memory of Rosa, his wife, companion, and best friend for more than 30 years, who always said with her simple but deeply penetrating wisdom, that special way that only she had of transforming complex truths into accessible words. Edward, mi amor, true happiness is hidden in the little things in life, in the simple moments that we live every day, not in those great achievements that everyone runs after, as if they were the most important thing in the world. And he took this philosophy of life seriously, with an almost religious dedication, finding genuine pleasure and deep meaning in activities that to others might seem banal or even boring. Watering the plants, carefully observing how each one responded uniquely to his dedicated care, patiently studying the peculiar behavior and distinct personalities of the cats, Tobias more adventurous and sociable, Francisca more reserved and observant, keeping the house always immaculate as a living sanctuary of happy memories, and carefully preserving every object, every photograph, every small memento that still contained tangible traces of Rosa's loving and comforting presence. The neighbors on Maple Street knew and respected him as a naturally reserved but invariably cordial and polite man, the kind of person who greets everyone without exception with a genuinely sincere and warm good morning. Who always offers to help immediately when asked, especially elderly women with heavy grocery bags or technical problems with household appliances, and who never, absolutely never willingly engages in petty gossip, trivial neighborhood conflicts, or the heated political discussions that sometimes erupted during homeowners association meetings. Mrs. Conceição, who had moved into the sky-blue house with its meticulously manicured garden next door to hers almost 8 years ago, had tried many creative times over the years to engage in conversation about more personal and intimate matters using varied and increasingly sophisticated strategies that range from direct and blatant questions to seemingly casual comments about family life, relationships, future plans, secret hobbies, or hidden passions. "And family, Mr. Edward? Don't you have children, nephews, grandchildren scattered around the country? Relatives who live in other cities or states?" She would ask with barely concealed curiosity as she pretended to be completely focused on watering her colorful petunias in the common area between the two properties, trying to sound natural and conversational, but in reality fishing for information with the persistence characteristic of someone who made this activity a true personal hobby. "Family is me and my pets here, Mrs. Conceição," he would invariably reply with a polite but definitely firm and final smile, gently petting Tobias or Francisca, whoever happened to appear at the right moment in the conversation, as if they were trained and aware accomplices to diplomatically interrupt potentially awkward or invasive conversations. This natural and seemingly instinctive ability to be genuinely friendly and approachable, without ever allowing social interactions to deepen beyond a superficial and controlled level, had become his trademark. Recognized and respected throughout the block, an invisible but clearly established boundary that neighbors had learned to recognize and grudgingly respect. That day, it was a seemingly ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday in March, with the kind of cloudy, indecisive sky typical of a fickle, capricious spring in Chicago, when temperatures swing dramatically between the residual chill of a long, harsh winter and the promising warmth of a summer still months away. When Mrs. Conceição Silva finally and irrevocably decided that she could no longer endure, even for a single day, the curiosity that had literally been gnawing at her for months, like an incessant and disturbing mental tingling, an obsession that had begun as a casual interest and evolved into something that genuinely interfered with her ability to concentrate on other daily activities. The decision hadn't been made impulsively. On the contrary, she had meticulously planned every detail, down to the smallest detail, with the meticulous and systematic dedication of a professional detective preparing a high-stakes surveillance operation. The plan was seemingly simple, but strategically sound. She would pretend she urgently needed to go to the Lincoln Park shopping center to resolve complicated and unavoidable banking matters. Something about problems with her savings account that would require long and potentially frustrating conversations with multiple bank employees. At the exact same sacred and unchanging time that Edward religiously made his mysterious monthly outing. To make her cover story more convincing and natural, she carefully chose her best formal outfit, a blue and white floral dress that she considered elegant but understated enough to avoid attracting unnecessary attention, grabbed the brown leather purse she used exclusively on special and important occasions, made sure she had enough cash in her wallet to justify her presence at the mall, in case someone she knew questioned her, and strategically positioned herself at the living room's picture window, half hidden behind the beige linen curtains, creating what she considered the perfect vantage point. "Today, I'll solve once and for all this mystery that's been literally keeping me awake at night for months," she muttered determinedly to herself, nervously adjusting her reading glasses and checking for the third time that she had all the necessary items for her investigative mission in her bag. What she hadn't imagined, not even in her wildest and most imaginative dreams, nor in her most elaborate and detailed speculations, was that her seemingly simple and straightforward surveillance operation would become one of the most profoundly moving, emotionally transformative, and spiritually significant experiences of her entire 62-year life, filled with varied experiences, joys, sorrows, surprises, and disappointments. Promptly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Mrs. Conceição literally held her breath when the moment arrived, Edward emerged from her home with the same steady, determined stride as always. But there was something subtly different about his expression that particular day, a kind of restrained, focused energy that she, even from the respectful and carefully calculated distance she maintained to avoid detection, could intuitively perceive with that special sensitivity we sometimes develop when paying extremely close attention to someone. He seemed more determined than usual, almost solemn and ceremonial, like someone mentally preparing themselves and gathering courage to fulfill a personal mission of extreme emotional importance and profound meaning, something that goes far beyond superficial appearances and touches the very core of their being. Edward began his mysterious journey by stopping first at Mrs. Martha's colourful and cosy toy store on North Avenue. A small but extraordinarily well-organized and thoughtfully curated establishment that catered primarily to young families with small children and occasionally grandparents looking for special gifts for their beloved grandchildren. Mrs. Conceição watched in fascination as he lingered for long, careful minutes inside the store, clearly scanning the shelves with microscopic attention, picking up different objects, examining them in detail, analyzing every aspect with the meticulousness of someone choosing something very special for a very special person, someone whose preferences, age and personality he knows intimately and wants to honor perfectly. Strategically positioned behind a newsstand that offered excellent sightlines while maintaining plausible deniability, Mrs. Conceição saw him emerge from the toy store, carefully carrying a colorful and cheerful package wrapped in bright children's gift paper, decorated with cartoon characters, tied with a gold bow that literally shone and sparkled in the filtered light of the March afternoon sun. The package seemed to have been wrapped with extraordinary care and attention to detail, as if the visual presentation were as important as the content, as if he instinctively understood that the first visual impression of a gift can be almost as meaningful as the gift itself. Edward then headed methodically, and with obvious purposefulness, to the Walgreens pharmacy on the corner of Fullerton and Lincoln, where he remained for a few more minutes that seemed like eternities to the increasingly curious observer, consulting seemingly specific products and chatting discreetly but earnestly with the pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with grey hair whom Mrs. Conceição recognized as someone who had worked there for years and had a reputation for being extremely knowledgeable and helpful. Whatever conversation they had seemed important and somewhat detailed, with Edward asking questions and taking mental notes of the answers, as if he were gathering specific information for a very particular purpose. After the pharmacy, he continued his mysterious journey by heading to Mr. Antonio's traditional Italian bakery on Halsted Street, a family-owned establishment for 3 generations and famous throughout the neighborhood for its authentic pastries and desserts. There, He purchased something carefully wrapped in special paper, clearly something delicate and valuable that required gentle handling. Mrs. Conceição could smell the distinctive aroma of fresh-baked goods emanating from the bakery, even from the distance where she was positioned, and wondered intensely what specific item Edward had selected and why. The final stop on the mysterious shopping expedition was Donna Carmen, small but charming flower shop on Lincoln Avenue. A tiny storefront packed with vibrant blooms and plants of every imaginable type, where Edward chose with obvious care a modest but thoughtfully arranged bouquet, a combination of flowers that had clearly been selected for specific symbolic meaning rather than mere aesthetic appeal. Mrs. Conceição noted that he spent considerable time discussing options with the florist, pointing at different flowers and apparently asking questions about their meanings, their longevity, and their appropriateness for specific occasions. Each stop was executed with the same meticulous attention and respectful consideration, as if each item chosen had a deeply special meaning and a very specific purpose that completely transcended the mere act of shopping. The curious neighbor began to realize, with growing fascination and mounting excitement, that these were definitely not random purchases or momentary impulses. There was a clear pattern, a loving and carefully thought-out logic behind each careful choice Edward made, as if he were following a mental list, lovingly crafted over a long period of time, each item selected to serve a specific purpose in a larger plan that she still couldn't fathom, but was desperate to understand. The surprise that would completely change all her speculations and theories came when Edward definitely did not return home by the usual and familiar route she had mapped out in her mind during months of casual observation. Instead, to her complete amazement and growing sense of anticipation, Edward determinedly headed for Chicago General Hospital on the north side, carrying all his carefully selected packages with even more care and delicacy than before, as if they were precious treasures destined for special people who awaited them anxiously and hopefully, people who needed exactly what he was bringing and would appreciate every detail of his thoughtful selections. As such, Mrs. Conceição returned to her house on Maple Street with significantly more questions than answers, feeling exactly like someone who had opened a mysterious box, only to discover that inside was another box, even more intriguing, complex and puzzling. The surprising discovery that Edward regularly visited Chicago General Hospital every month only served to exponentially deepen the mystery that had been consuming her thoughts, creating new, fascinating possibilities in her naturally curious and analytically oriented mind. During the days following that earth-shaking revelation, she simply couldn't stop thinking obsessively about the shocking scene she had witnessed, replaying every single detail in her memory like someone watching a movie in slow motion, analyzing every gesture, every pause, every facial expression for clues about what was really happening. He then began to pay increased attention to aspects he had previously considered irrelevant or unimportant. The specific types of colorful packages he carefully carried during his monthly expeditions, the particular expression on his face when he returned from mysterious journeys, always slightly more relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, the exact time he spent away from home during these trips, and even small changes in his body posture and overall demeanor in the days following each monthly ritual. There was something deeply ritualistic about those monthly walks, as if they were unavoidable sacred commitments that literally gave meaning and purpose to his existence appointments he would never miss, regardless of weather, health issues, or any other obstacles that might arise. The man who bought her gifts every month had awakened in her an almost urgent and irresistible need to fully understand what really happened during those regular hospital visits, a curiosity that went far beyond the simple neighborhood gossip that initially motivated her interest. It was as if a fascinating and complex puzzle had been placed directly before her by forces of fate. And each small piece discovered only revealed the even greater complexity of the total enigma, creating a kind of mental addiction to unraveling the complete truth behind Edward's mysterious behavior. Mrs. Conceiçon's informal investigation quickly took on larger and more systematic proportions when she decided to strategically involve other known neighbors and trusted friends in the collective search for concrete answers and reliable information. Mrs. Maria Aparecida Santos, a kind woman who had emigrated from Brazil at the same time as Conceição, and who had worked as a dedicated volunteer at Chicago General Hospital every weekend for over 5 years, was the first person questioned about Edward's possible presence on the medical premises. "Ah, Mr. Edward Martinez from Maple Street. Of course, I know him very well. He is genuinely one of the most beloved and respected visitors in the entire hospital," Maria replied, with unmistakable enthusiasm and obvious genuine affection, unaware that she was inadvertently revealing information extremely valuable to the ongoing investigation. "A regular visitor?" Conceição asked with carefully controlled curiosity, feigning absolute naturalness while her heart literally raced with excitement, expectation, and anxiety, as if she were on the verge of discovering something monumentally important that would finally explain the mystery that had been consuming her thoughts for so many months. "Yes, absolutely. He visits the children in the pediatric ward every single month, always on the same exact day, always with the same loving dedication and consistent commitment that never wavers regardless of circumstances. He always brings carefully chosen gifts, and I mean really thoughtfully selected, not just random toys, sits patiently beside the hospital beds, talks with them about subjects that interest each individual child, tells fascinating old stories from his time working for the Chicago Transit Authority that leave the little ones completely captivated and engaged, and sometimes even helps with homework assignments when the children have been hospitalized for a long time and missing significant school content. The revelation fell like a veritable emotional bomb on Conceição's completely surprised and unprepared mind, creating a seismic shift in her understanding that literally took her breath away. The seemingly solitary and mysterious man, whom all neighbors automatically assumed lived exclusively for himself in his silent house, in fact, voluntarily dedicated a significant part of his life and precious energy to bringing joy and comfort to hospitalized children who were facing difficult moments away from their families, separated from everything familiar and comforting them during some of the most challenging periods of their young lives. But the extraordinary discoveries were only beginning, and what came next would completely transform not only her understanding of Edward, but also her entire perspective on generosity, human kindness, and the profound ways in which we precipitously judge other people based solely on superficial appearances and limited observations that tell only a tiny fraction of the complete story. The real truth, as she was about to discover, was infinitely more beautiful, more complex, and more deeply moving than anything her imagination had been able to conjure during all those months of speculation and curious observation. Mrs. Aparecida continued sharing details that painted an increasingly vivid picture of Edward's activities at the hospital. "You know, Mrs. Conceição, he's not just a regular visitor who shows up, hands out a few gifts and leaves. He truly invests time and emotional energy in getting to know each child individually. He learns their names, their favorite colors, what kind of stories they like, what their fears are, what makes them smile. I've seen him sit for hours next to a scared little girl, just talking softly and holding her hand as she fell asleep. I've seen him help a boy with his math homework, making it fun to practice analogies from his days as a traffic officer. He brings not only toys but also books, art supplies, and sometimes even small musical instruments to children who show interest. And you know what really bothers me?" Maria continued, her voice softening with evident emotion. "He never seeks recognition. He never wants his name mentioned in hospital newsletters or at volunteer recognition events. When staff try to thank him publicly or nominate him for volunteer awards, he always politely declines. He says it's not about him, that he just wants to make sure no child feels forgotten or alone during their stay. That kind of humility, that kind of pure motivation, it's rare, Mrs. Conceição, very rare. The shocking discovery about the regular visits to the pediatric hospital opened a completely new chapter in Mrs. Conceição's personal investigation, but also awakened in her a totally unexpected and powerful feeling of profound admiration for the neighbor she had judged so narrowly and unfairly during all those months of casual observation and uninformed speculation. For the entire week following that transformative revelation, she could no longer observe Edward with the same critical and superficially curious eyes as before, now noticing significant details that had previously gone completely unnoticed by her limited perception and narrow focus. The genuinely caring way he cared for the abandoned cats that had chosen his home as a safe refuge, providing not just food and shelter, but also companionship and unconditional love for creatures that had obviously experienced hardship and neglect before finding sanctuary in his caring presence. The almost maternal patience with which he watered each individual plant in the garden, as if silently conversing with them, intuitively understanding that growing things need not just water and sunlight, but also attention, care, and yes, even conversation, even if one-sided. The discreet but absolutely consistent kindness with which he greeted absolutely everyone on the street, without distinction of social class, economic status, or personal sympathy, treating everyone, from the mailman to the wealthy banker 3 houses down, with exactly the same level of respect and genuine warmth. She began to realize with growing clarity and a certain amount of personal embarrassment that those mysterious monthly outings were not isolated events or inexplicable eccentricities, but rather an authentic reflection of a genuinely generous personality that expressed itself naturally in subtle and respectful ways in everyday life. Every small gesture, every small kindness, every moment of consideration for others, which she had previously dismissed as mere politeness or insignificant social behavior, now revealed itself as part of a larger pattern of character evidence of a deeply compassionate soul that had learned to channel grief into service to others. The man who bought her gifts every month had revealed only a visible facet of a profoundly kind character that she was finally beginning to understand in a more mature, respectful, and comprehensive way. Driven by a curiosity that now harmoniously mixed with genuine respect and growing admiration, Concession decided to broaden her investigation by strategically speaking with other people in the community who might have additional information about Edward and his activities, always maintaining the utmost discretion so as not to violate his obvious preference for privacy. A revealing conversation with Tony Marinelli, the dedicated owner of the traditional toy store that has served families in the region for over 20 years, was particularly enlightening and emotionally moving. "Ah, Mrs. Silver, Edward is truly a very special customer here at my store. Every month he shows up punctually and chooses toys with a care I've literally never seen from other customers in all my decades in business," Tony said, with a genuine smile on his face, weathered by the time and the daily concerns of small business ownership. He always asks in detail about the quality of the products, whether they are appropriate and safe for different specific ages, whether they will truly bring lasting joy to children, and whether the materials are non-toxic and durable enough to withstand enthusiastic play. "And there's one more thing that always caught my attention in his behavior," Tony continued, clearly pleased to have someone genuinely interested in hearing his observations about such a special customer. "He always, without a single exception, asks for all toys to be wrapped in brightly colored paper. He says that visual presentation is extremely important to immediately spark curiosity and a smile in little ones before they even open the gift. He says that sometimes a child in the hospital feels forgotten by the outside world, and that beautiful wrapping can make them feel special and remembered. And when choosing educational toys, he always asks if they will stimulate creativity and learning in a fun and engaging way. He's one of the most attentive, careful, and respectful customers I've ever had in my entire career in commerce." Each detail, carefully revealed, progressively painted the portrait of an extraordinary man who had transformed generosity into true, subtle art, meticulously caring for every aspect of his actions to maximize the happiness and well-being he could provide for people he didn't even know. Personally, children whose names he might never even learn, but whose smiles and moments of joy were precious enough to justify his monthly pilgrimages to the hospital. But it was during a casual visit to the central pharmacy that Concession discovered the most intriguing and moving clue of all she had gathered to date. Information that would add a completely new dimension to her understanding of Edward's secret activities. A pharmacist, Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, an experienced professional who had worked at that location for almost 15 years, remembered Edward distinctly when questioned carefully. "Ah, yes, Mr. Martinez, such a thoughtful gentleman. He comes in regularly, always asking about age-appropriate vitamins and supplements for children recovering from various illnesses. He never buys anything for himself, of course, always focused on what might help boost young patients' immunity or energy. He asks detailed questions about medication interactions, which flavors children prefer, which forms are easiest for sick children to take. I always wondered who all those supplements were for, because I knew he lived alone. Now that you mention his hospital visits, it all makes perfect sense. The turnaround. It was during a seemingly casual conversation with the head nurse at Chicago General Hospital, an experienced and widely respected professional named Carmen Oliveira Santos, a Brazilian-American woman who had devoted her entire career to healthcare and was known throughout the medical community for her exceptional dedication and compassionate care. That Mrs. Concession finally discovered the information that would radically and definitively change her understanding of Edward's entire complex and deeply touching story. "Ah, Mr. Edward Martinez of Maple Street, He is genuinely one of the most special and inspiring people I've had the privilege of meeting in my 30 years of dedicated professional life in healthcare," said Nurse Carmen, her eyes literally shining with sincere emotion and profound respect. Her voice carrying that special warmth that comes from witnessing genuine human kindness in its purest form. "But, Ma'am, I can tell you that his real story is even more touching and significant than people in the community imagine or speculate in their conversations. He didn't start these regular visits by chance, a random impulse, or the simple abstract kindness that some people occasionally demonstrate. There's a story behind it, a deeply personal and profoundly moving reason." Conceição immediately felt her heart race intensely, instinctively sensing that she was about to discover something absolutely fundamental that would explain not only Eduardo's mysterious behavior, but also reveal human dimensions she hadn't even imagined existed, depths of character and resilience that most people never have the opportunity to witness or even comprehend. Her hands literally trembled slightly as she prepared to hear what promised to be a revelation that would change everything she thought she understood about her neighbor. Mr. Edward tragically lost a beloved grandson a few years ago, an absolutely adorable 7-year-old boy named Gabriel, who was literally the light of his eyes, his pride and joy, his entire world concentrated in one small, vibrant human being. Nurse Carmen continued, her voice softly choked with emotion from the difficult memories she had witnessed firsthand. The little boy spent long and extremely difficult months hospitalized right here in our pediatric ward, courageously fighting a serious and relentless disease that unfortunately ended up winning the battle despite all medical efforts, all hopes, all prayers, all love poured into fighting it. And throughout this terrible and anguishing period, Mr. Edward practically lived here in the hospital, witnessing every single moment of the treatment, every small victory, every setback, every hope raised and dashed. But what most impressed all of us on the medical staff is that even immersed in his own indescribable pain, he observed attentively and was deeply touched by the suffering of other hospitalized children who didn't have the same solid support network that Gabriel had. Even while his own heart was breaking day by day, he noticed which children had fewer visitors, which families couldn't stay constantly because of work obligations or financial pressures, which little ones seemed more alone and frightened during their treatments. A revelation fell like a devastating bolt of lightning into Conceição's completely unprepared mind, suddenly opening a totally new understanding of the profound motivations behind her neighbor's actions, revealing layers of character and spiritual strength she had never imagined existed. Her eyes filled with involuntary tears as she began to comprehend the truly heroic magnitude of Edward's silent gesture, finally understanding that his monthly visits weren't random acts of kindness, but rather a systematic, intentional response to a personal tragedy that could have easily broken him completely. The man who bought gifts every month had literally been born from the deepest pain a human being can experience, the loss of a beloved child, but also from an absolutely extraordinary capacity to transform devastating personal suffering into unconditional love for one's neighbor. Instead of allowing grief to consume him, instead of turning inward and becoming bitter or resentful about life's unfairness, Edward had somehow found the strength to turn his pain outward, channeling it into service to other children facing battles similar to the one his Gabriel had lost. A nurse continued patiently recounting emotionally moving details that painted a completely different and much more profound picture of the story that Conceição thought she was beginning to understand. When Gabriel passed away, Mr. Edward was understandably devastated, completely lost, without purpose in life, like so many grandparents who lose grandchildren they adored. Grief counselors told me afterward that he went through all the normal stages of mourning, but also something additional, something that most people never experience. For weeks after the funeral, on a morning I will never forget, he returned to the hospital, not to visit or resolve bureaucratic questions. He had no more direct personal reason to be here anymore. He returned because, during those painful months of vigil, he had realized with crystal clarity how many children were left completely alone during long and difficult treatments. How many dedicated parents could not be constantly present because of the relentless demands of work or the geographic distance of smaller cities throughout Illinois and surrounding states. He had witnessed firsthand how isolation and loneliness could compound physical suffering, how a child's spirit could diminish when they felt forgotten by the world outside those hospital walls. Mrs. Conceição felt hot tears forming involuntarily in her eyes as she finally understood the truly heroic magnitude of Edward's silent gesture. He was a man who had managed to find a sublime way of honoring his beloved grandson's memory, not through eternal mourning and bitterness, but through the generous multiplication of love and care for other children who were facing battles similar to the one her Gabriel had tragically lost. It was, she realized, a form of memorial infinitely more beautiful and meaningful than any stone monument or traditional tribute could ever be. The secret. The discovery of the true story behind Edward's mysterious monthly walks not only completely transformed Mrs. Conceição's perspective on her neighbor, but also awakened in her an urgent and irresistible need to do something constructive and respectful with the precious information she had received through her investigative efforts. During the days following that transformative revelation, she simply couldn't stop thinking obsessively about how profoundly unfair she had been in her hasty judgments, how she had constructed a completely misguided narrative of mystery, eccentricity, and even suspicion around a man who, in concrete reality, was practicing one of the most noble, pure, and inspiring acts she had ever encountered in her entire life of 62 years, filled with varied experiences. The emotional weight of this discovery made her seriously question how many times she had judged people hastily and superficially. How many genuine stories of silent kindness went unnoticed daily, due to her personal inability to see beyond immediate appearances and obvious superficialities? How many times had she constructed elaborate theories about neighbors, colleagues, and strangers on the street, based solely on limited observations that told only tiny fractions of the complete stories behind people's behaviors? How many Edward Martinezes existed in her world, performing quiet miracles of compassion that she was too self-absorbed or narrow-minded to recognize? The man who bought her gifts every month had unwittingly become a powerful mirror that mercilessly reflected her own severe limitations of perception and empathy, forcing her to fundamentally and honestly reconsider how she observed, interpreted, and judged the complex world around her. For a woman who prided herself on being observant, on knowing everything that happened in the neighborhood, on being able to read people accurately, this revelation was both humbling and transformative, a necessary lesson about assumptions, prejudices, and the profound complexity of human experience that we so often reduce to simple, inadequate explanations. Driven by an intense combination of genuine admiration, deep personal guilt, and a sincere desire to do what she considered morally right, Conceição made a courageous decision that would change not only her personal relationship with Edward, but also the social dynamics of the entire curious Maple Street neighborhood. Instead of irresponsibly spreading the secret as sensationalist gossip, as she certainly would have done in other, less significant circumstances in her life, when information was merely entertainment rather than sacred trust, she decided to approach him directly, with total honesty, genuine humility, and profound respect for the pain and generosity she had discovered. The afternoon after that difficult decision, she carefully prepared a coffee session with her best homemade cookies, dressed in her most respectable outfit, nothing flashy or attention-seeking, just dignified and sincere, and knocked delicately on his door, her heart racing with nervousness, uncertainty, and anticipation. "Mr. Edward, would you grant me a few minutes for a private conversation? I have something very important and delicate to tell you," she asked, her voice significantly softer, more respectful, and humble than her usual tone of curious neighbor, always fishing for information. When he opened the door with his characteristically gentle and naturally curious expression, she instantly realized she was in for one of the most important, delicate, and potentially transformative conversations of her entire existence. This wasn't going to be casual neighborhood chit-chat or superficial social interaction, but rather a moment of genuine human connection that would require courage, honesty, and vulnerability from both participants. The man who bought gifts every month was about to discover that his most intimate and sacred secret had been involuntarily revealed, but also that it had inspired a profound personal transformation in the person most observed, judged, and speculated about his actions in the entire neighborhood. "Mr. Edward, I need to humbly offer your most sincere apologies." Conceição began with genuine tears in her eyes, and a voice choked with the emotion she had been suppressing for days. "I discovered about your sacred visits to the hospital, about the children you visit and bring joy to, about the extraordinary kindness you silently practice every month, and also about a terrible loss that motivated all of this. And I am deeply and sincerely ashamed of having created foolish mysteries, empty speculations, and even suspicions around something as beautiful, generous, and sacred as what you do." Edward listened to her patiently in complete silence, showing no surprise, irritation, or discomfort, simply maintaining the same serene, dignified, and understanding expression that always characterized his mature personality, as if he had been expecting this conversation to eventually happen. As if he understood that secrets of such magnitude rarely remain hidden forever in close-knit communities, where people inevitably notice patterns and eventually discover truths. "Mrs. Conceição," he responded calmly, after a long moment of respectful reflection, his voice carrying that special quality of someone who has learned to find peace through great suffering. "You absolutely don't need to apologize for being naturally curious about people's lives. Curiosity is a perfectly natural and understandable human trait. I only never spoke openly about these things because, well, it's not really about me or my pain, it's about them, about the children who are suffering now and need care, attention, and hope more than they need to know my personal story. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and share the video with your friends." Reflection. The man who bought gifts every month was never a mystery after all. Never was. The real mystery was in the eyes of those who observed without seeking to truly understand, those who judged without knowing the full story, those who created fictional narratives instead of having the courage to simply ask, to connect authentically, to recognize that our first impressions are often dramatically incomplete. What about you? How have you looked at the people around you recently? What stories have you created about neighbors, colleagues, strangers on the street that you see regularly but never actually know? What assumptions have you made based on limited observations, superficial interactions, or simply because someone's behavior doesn't fit your expectations of what is normal?